Social justice means applying the law equally to all people, but in practice, that doesn't always happen. I'm John Gonzalez. I'm here with my former law partner, Jack DeRora. We practice law, we seek social justice. On this show, we reveal the conflict between the two.
You know, for a while, it was just us in the office over a cup of coffee talking about the news of the day. With social justice issues dominating our culture, our focus became, how do we as lawyers make a difference?
Today, it's just the two of us, Jack, and we're going to talk about whether we expect too much honesty from our politicians or whether we tolerate too much dishonesty, if I can frame the issue that way.
I think you framed it well.
Thinking about what you had mentioned to me the other day, this Maryland Governor Wes Moore and others that have misrepresented their military past. I don't know if I told you the story. After my dad passed away, most of the stuff that he wore, his clothes, because he was about my size, came to me as opposed to my brother or other siblings. But one of them was a really nice United States Marine pullover that my dad wore often, and I always loved it. So I was wearing it one day while I was out for a walk, and two guys came past me and said, "Thank you for your service." And I thought, oh, I can't wear this.
Right.
Because I don't know what the response to that is. Like, I didn't want to get into a long thing. Oh, it's my dad's. I love it. I think about him. It just was, "Thank you for your service, sir." And, I wasn't trying to misrepresent that, and I didn't correct it. And then I'd seen these two gentlemen one or two other times after that, and I could tell that the one guy must have been former military, maybe a former Marine, and wanted to talk about it. So I avoided them like the plague, so I didn't have to do that. But, to me, it was dishonest, but I didn't correct it. And maybe if I forced to, I would have to. But I think there's just such a pull for people like politicians that need to be accepted that they embellish things like that. Well, now, do you think it's a problem?
Well, first of all, I'm confident that the reason you didn't explain the position to these folks you encountered wasn't because you were trying to promote an idea that didn't exist. You just felt it was too long of a story to tell. That's different than what we're talking about. It's interesting that we see this kind of behavior. It's referred to as stolen valor, and we've seen some number of times where politicians overstate their military record. What's interesting with a gent like Wes Moore, he's this handsome, well-spoken governor of Maryland, maybe a contender for the presidency. And he was applying for, I think, a White House internship or whatever the term is, or fellowship, I think it was called. And he said that he received the Bronze Star, I think in 2006, for service in Iraq. Well, the reality is he actually reserved the Army Commendation Medal, a lower-ranking medal. So now the question is, well, what does this say about his character? Put that aside for a second. Let's be lawyers for a second. Certainly, there's no question he did not have that medal in 2006. Supposedly, he was told he was being recommended for it. So if you wanted to be a lawyer, you could say, wait a minute, the only thing that you knew at that time was that you were being recommended for the medal. So put that on the application, right?
Well, if I was his lawyer,
yeah,
I might argue that he earned it at that time. So the fact that he said he had it isn't that big of a deal because he was 99% of the way there.
Well, I wouldn't even say he earned it. I don't know how you earned it until you see the paperwork.
Well, maybe I don't know what that medal is exactly for, but doesn't have to do with some event that had taken place, right?
It was the Bronze Star comes in two different flavors as far as I understand. One for heroism, one for just great service. But my point is, You either have the medal or you've been told you've been recommended for the medal. There's nothing in between, right?
Right.
And then there were some other statements. Now, and then to make it more complicated, he received the medal, in fact, in 2024, 18 years later. So here's the issue. And there were some other, there were some other questions about his recitation of how much combat time he actually had, or whether he actually had combat time as opposed to being a staff officer. So here's the issue. Here's this man who's done well as governor, might be a contender. Do you take these statements as disqualifying? Because obviously these things didn't happen. And I don't know the answer to that question, but it certainly is one worth weighing, because what do we expect of our politicians? Do we expect them to be flawed human beings, or do we expect them to be something better than average?
What bothers me about it too, and this may be kind of on your mind, is that, if it's my next door neighbor telling me the same thing, what does it matter, right? Like, you got it, you didn't get it, you may have had it. But when it's somebody in the public eye that understands there's going to be scrutiny, I start thinking, what is going on here? If you misrepresent something, it's going to come out at that level of politics, right? Governor, running for president, everything's going to be looked at by the opposition. There's companies set up that do nothing but opposition research. So, I guess lying on your resume to get an internship when you're 22, I might give him a pass. But by the time he's running for governor and running for potentially the Supreme Court, that's when I think I would start to draw the line. Because at that point, you're making decisions that I would think that you should know better.
Well, if he was a captain in the Army at that time, just roughly counting the years, he had to be at least 26.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But here, you brought up 2 points. One is just plain the issue of dishonesty, right? The other one is it's kind of stupid, because nobody's thinking, or he's not thinking, could I get caught? Who's going to look at this? So then the next thought is, well, okay, maybe these aren't that big of a deal. It wasn't like he walked away with $1 million and had an affair with somebody else's wife. But now you go, well, what's he going to do in a tight situation when he's in office? What's he going to flub for his own personal enrichment or to escape criticism that isn't lawful? If he did these things, what's he going to do when matters more important are before him?
I often think that if you're going for, and I guess I would lump a governorship in with the presidency, but, why can't we have that leader that doesn't have those flaws for that position? There's only one person that can be the president of the United States at one time. Why can't we have the best person? They can be smart, then they can also be honest, and they could have lived their life honestly. Now, people would argue with me that there isn't a person like that in the world, right? Maybe Jesus when he walked the earth. But other than that, there aren't people that don't have flaws. So, you and I had talked about this before. One of the problems is we're really electing or trying to decide between two evils, so to speak, right? And I probably evil's probably not the best word for that, but you've got two candidates because of our system that the Democrats bring one person up and the Republicans bring the other. So you got this governor of Maryland with a couple of blemishes that you're like, boy, that was stupid. I wish he was more honest about it. But overall, he seems to be a really good candidate. Then you have this other candidate that may also have some flaws, but you got to pick. So now we're accepting the dishonesty. We're accepting these flaws because we have no other choice. I often wondered what would happen to our elections if there was a third choice, which is neither. Would we as voters be able to send a message to the party system that unless you start bringing us people that meet this extra high, standard, we're not going to pick either. Let's do it again.
I think that speaks to the fact that the whole process of politics is beyond the reach of the average mortal human being. It's conducted at a higher level. All right, now let's switch and think about how politics, in the battle that politics is, changes the whole conversation. And at the forefront of this discussion is Graham Plattner, running for Senate. It was just disclosed, was it yesterday or the day before? Now, for the first time, he's been accused of actual sexual assault as opposed to just bad conduct.
Which he's denying.
So probably by the time this podcast gets published, I'm going to bet lunch that he drops out of the race. And only because the Democratic Party is not going to fund him. But put that aside for a second. Let's just look at the dynamics. So he had been sending out some number of texts or maybe other forms of social media where he made a number of comments, I can't remember what they were, disparaging about women, disparaging about rape. There may have been, my memory is a little frail, some racial comments, all kinds of stuff that nobody with any sense of dignity would want to be associated with. He qualifies it all by saying, look, I was going through a dark time in my life, post-traumatic stress. There's also this issue about this tattoo, which resembled a Nazi logo, the Totenkopf, if I'm saying it correctly. But he gains traction. He gains a lot of traction. And I listened to him and I was impressed. So I'm impressed because he's saying something that really resonates, which is, gee, when we talk about universal Medicare, we hear there's no money for that. But let's start attacking Iran. Nobody questions the money for that. And he talks about how imbalanced the system is. And he talks about the kind of things that you and I talk about. And he gets people like Jon Stewart who advocate for him because he is this refreshing breath of fresh air. And then we hear people like James Carville, who helped promote Clinton into the White House, say, forget the virtue thing. We have got to assemble everything we can to neutralize Trump. Vote for this fellow. Now, and he gets the primary. Of course, he gets the primary because his opponent is a 78-year-old governor of Maine. How smart was that of Chuck Schumer to suggest that Janet Mills, who might be a very good person, run for Senate at age 78? So now you're faced with this situation. Do you tank your virtue, your virtue, your sense for virtue? David French, who I respect a lot, a writer for the New York Times, wasn't swayed by anything that impacted me. He said, it may be the lesser of two evils, but it's still an evil. We don't want this. And I don't know the answer. Now that he's assaulted a woman, now that there's some credible statements about assault, I think he's out of the picture. But up to that point, how are we supposed to look at that? What do we do with that?
I almost lean towards Carville for the reason that fight fire with fire. I mean, the Republicans don't have that dilemma, right? I mean, Trump, Hegseth, Patel, the number of people that are in that administration that are caught up with Jeffrey Epstein and all sorts of nefarious stuff just doesn't matter, it seems. Now, I say that in the broad sense. I'm sure there's an evangelist somewhere that will say that Trump is not godly, but that's okay because Trump's doing the godly work, right?
Right.
And so, so when I hear Carville and I listen to him talk about that this is a blood sport, right? We got to be in it to win. You think, can we elect a guy like Graham Plattner and then get rid of him later for another Democrat that may be, more palatable? What bothers me more, Jack, though, is you and I are grappling with the moral issue. Do we support somebody that's like this? As opposed to the people that are okay with it because they like Plattner. They like what he says. He plays to their emotional needs, right? And he's authentic in that.
Let me stop you for a second. I once heard somebody say, wait a minute, authenticity is not the deciding factor. A serial killer is authentic, right? Authenticism, being authentic isn't the issue. There's got to be some virtue along there.
But I think that's probably not true in politics.
Okay.
I think that just like you had just said, when you listen to this guy, he appealed to your emotional side. He's saying the things that you want to hear, and he must be coming off sincere about it. I mean, he's not so phony like a Marjorie Taylor Greene or somebody like that.
He presents himself well.
Yeah. So you buy in emotionally to it, and he's authentic. So you're like, I think I can support this guy to do the right thing, even though all the evidence now that we know is pointing against it. And that is exactly Trump, right? I mean, you have people that support Trump, even though everything about him should tell us that he is an inauthentic, is that the word I'm looking for?
Right.
Person. But they're sold on him emotionally. And, lawyers are taught, at least trial lawyers are taught to use that in court, right? I mean, an authentic lawyer can sell a case better than the lawyer that the jury just doesn't believe. And so, if you can show that the other case is not authentic in some way, even though they got better facts, you have a better chance at persuading those people. And, I just think that...
But let's make a difference there. Certainly you have to be authentic as a lawyer, but you have to be authentic about a cause that resonates, right? And so I think Trump is authentic. There's no question about what he is. He is authentic. But what I'm trying to say is that's not enough. You have to be authentic and you have to be on the right path. But we overlook the right path, and we overlook the right path because we look narrowly sometimes to our own self-interest and we forget the big picture.
I wonder if there is anybody out there that can meet our expectations for our politicians. When you think about our profession, we are fiduciaries in a lot of senses. We have to uphold a certain amount of ethics and morals, and we as lawyers and a lot of us fall short of that. But there are standards and there are guardrails. In politics, there really isn't. And I think it's something that has changed a lot. You and I have talked a lot about when Ann was in politics. And even then, and this is going back now 15 years, she struggled with not wanting to misrepresent or be untruthful with people, but also presenting the Republican line, right? And the way that she navigated it and we navigated is oftentimes kind of like my story about wearing my dad's sweater, is you avoid it. You avoid having to lie about something. And if somebody has the wrong impression about you that helps politically, you just let it go. And one of the people that was very good about this was John Kasich, believe it or not. And the only reason I know is because my wife would point this out. When he would get on TV and he was being interviewed, he had very authentic takes on things. You knew his position. He was very passionate about it. But on other things where it wasn't advantageous to have that position, he just avoided it. And and you've heard it, talking points. So Ann said, when you get a question, you go back to your talking point. You don't answer the question, but boy, you answer that talking point like you're as passionate as ever. And Kasich was a master at it. But I think it's changed because now politicians don't approach it that way, Jack. They just, to me, just lie. Just outright misrepresent something because the Supreme Court has said that you don't have to be truthful in politics. It's all free speech. So Trump can just get up and say whatever he wants, as passionate as he can do it, as well as he communicates. Doesn't matter to him if it's true.
We have a hard time because our judgment of a person's character is influenced by what we want to see politically. Sound accurate?
Yeah, I agree.
So then if that's true, then we have to look at what happens when you continue down that path, that is, foregoing a rigid adherence to certain virtues so that you get what you want politically. And I think the outgrowth of that is what John Adams was saying when he said, we have no constitution which functions in the absence of a moral people. So fine, President Trump can create an executive branch and fill it with people who really are not qualified to be there and support him in causes that make most of us blush. And now we have one crisis after another. So we either take stock of what we're doing or it doesn't get any better. But the real problem is for people like you and me, we're so far removed from making things different.
Yeah, it's hard from where we are sitting to effectuate any change on this subject. I have to think of this Todd Blanche. He's going to be up in front of Congress to be our Attorney General. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, this should be the last position this guy should be in because he's just so loyal to Trump instead of to the American people. But having kind of followed it, just because it's a lawyer kind of thing, Bill Barr came out.
Oh, I saw that.
And enthusiastically supported him. And you're reading what Bill Barr's saying, you're like, what? How could you do this? How could you say these things, right? And I just think that, again, it goes back to if they're in your camp, you're willing to accept a lot of things that you wouldn't if they weren't in your camp, right? I mean, I've told people, I said, I can't vote for politicians that have shown me they're hypocrites because they're going to change their mind because they have no moral stop. Like, this was my position, it's still my position. A lot of our politicians that are going to be, these guys that are going to be running for president, right? J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio. To me, they're hypocrites. You can run the film from, 4 or 5 years ago or 6 years ago and see how much they've changed. Did you see the op-ed that was run? Again, it was J.D. Vance had written about Trump 10 years ago.
Oh,
they
goodness.
republished
Oh,
it.
yeah, right.
Yeah. How do you live with yourself? I've had clients call me and say, you know what, John, when we first met, you said A, B, C, and D. And I'll think to myself, I don't think I would have said that.
Oh, okay.
Not usually what I would do, but I'm not going to call you a liar, I guess. So why don't, what do we want to do about it? If you told me, that I was going to charge you 25% and now I'm charging you 30%, then I'll charge you the 25. I just don't want to be known or perceived as somebody that takes advantage of that type of a thing, right? It's my fault for not putting it in writing, is the way I'm thinking. Having said all that, what do you think then about our politicians in Ohio? We don't really have those scandal-laden. I know the press tries to, or not the press, but each party tries to make the other out to have some scandal. But, Husted and
Marino
and who's running against Husted?
Sherwood.
Sherwood
Brown.
Yeah,
Sherrod Brown.
Sherrod Brown. They're pretty upstanding, people. And I probably feel as definitive about those races as I do about why this guy in, Graham Plattner shouldn't be running. And it has nothing to do with the character in Ohio. It has to do with positions.
Let's go back for a second. Everybody you mentioned as being not in the right place were Republicans. But, Democrats get caught up in the same kind of silliness. And think about it. If this last scandal of just a day or two ago hadn't arisen, you would see on the general election ballot Plattner versus Susan Collins. So we have a person who is flawed against an incumbent who is occasionally voted against Trump. That really presents a lousy choice for your average Democrat or even independent, right? So then you have to say, well, how did we get here? Well, Plattner wasn't recruited by the Democratic Party, but some coterie of operatives, strategists as they're called, who elected not to go through the expense of the vetting that normally occurs. And then Chuck Schumer had previously suggested that Janet Mills, the 78-year-old governor, run. So here's the party. Here's the party presenting not the most attractive candidate, a 78-year-old woman. Mm-hmm. And it's not her gender, it's her age. And then we have these operatives bringing in somebody who gains a lot of traction. The system itself fails. So then you're left with this Sophie's choice. Oh, is it Plattner versus Susan Collins? Hardly a choice you want to make.
It is, and I don't think things are going to get better because the Supreme Court, in one of its recent decisions, in a simplistic explanation, have given the parties unlimited resources now. Because what was happening is there was a lot of restrictions on those funds. They couldn't coordinate with the candidate and stuff. That's all been removed, so parties can be as influential as far as the money as PACs and private PACs. And so I think the parties are going to gain more strength now. But I've always said that, especially in our local politics, in Franklin County, the Democrats are going to win every judicial race now. That's just pretty much a given. So now it's on the party to run the best candidates. And if you get a judge in place that is not a good judge, it's not on the people electing. It's on the party. And that's a tough row. I mean, I went through those judicial nomination committees. There wasn't a lot there about
qualification.
It was, how good of a party member have you been? Where have you contributed to our causes?
That's a cause that I gave up because I've written a lot about that, and I finally realized that I think lawyers like it the way it is. Getting back to where we are, here's another way of looking at Plattner. You would think that when you view a person with Plattner, with the baggage that he brought prior to the allegation of sexual assault, I think the average person might say, wait a minute. In fact, I know they were saying this. The press was saying, okay, he's got this baggage. What comes next, right? And nobody gave enough thought, or nobody acted on that thought of what comes next. Well, what came next was a woman spoke of sexual assault, which led to a second woman talking about sexual assault. Here's another way of looking at it. So let's go back to the days when we were in our law firm, and we announced to the staff, which was mostly female, hey, we're bringing in this lawyer. He's got this baggage, and we described the same kind of baggage that Plattner has. What do you think would have happened?
Sure.
Would they have said, oh, that's okay? Or would they have said, you've got to be kidding me? And we lose that kind of very simple, common sense perspective.
And when you say we, again, I think it goes back to the people that should be doing the vetting and the people that are in a position to support and run a guy like him. It's not the voters.
Right.
Again, the voters, we have such limited choices that I think as voters, we almost have to say, go with the evil you know.
Right.
But, who's the guy from Pennsylvania? Fetterman,
John Fetterman, the senator.
Yeah. So he got in on a very populist agenda, again, just speaking to what people wanted to hear, needed to hear. And now he's kind of a thorn in the side of the Democrat Party. So I do think that the party wants people in there that they think they can control and that they have confidence it's going to be right on our side when they're there. And so I think that means justifies the end kind of mentality is pervasive in our politics now. And what do you end up with? The current administration eventually.
We've talked about the criminal justice system being rigged. We've talked about other systems being rigged. This system is rigged. It's controlled by people with paradigms that I think are often inconsistent with how the voters see the world. And we're not going to change it. The Democratic Party should have handled this whole thing differently with Maine, starting with who does the party as an institution want to run? And now here's what's going to happen. This will be interesting because the odds are extremely good that Plattner has to bow out. Well, the Democratic Party has, I think, less than a week to come up with somebody. Now we're going to see what more of an establishment candidate looks like. And you can just about rest assured that that person will be fully vetted.
Yeah, and there'll be somebody safe, and then chances are Susan Collins will be back in the Senate.
Well, that's a consequence. That's right.
It's unfortunate. Well, as always, Jack, I wish we could solve the problem. My universal solution to what we see in politics is to vote every incumbent out every time that office comes up for re-election until we get somebody that realizes that they're in a temp job and they can be removed at any time. And until that happens, these politicians do not have we the people's interest at heart, I don't believe anymore.
I'm a big proponent of term limits, even though a very well-respected journalist like Tom Suttis rails against term limits for Ohio. Mm-hmm. Our thanks to WOSU and our sound engineer, Dalton Jones. If you like what you've heard, tell a friend. We want this to be more than just us. We want it to be all of us. like us, follow us, submit a review, help elevate our profile so that other podcast listeners can find us. We'll be back in another week or so with another social justice issue. Until then, so long.